ino Kenya twaitire thakame tukaingata muthungu.
Thank you mwana muthikiriria wakwa uyu ni Rutengeseni na njukite nigetha tunyitanire nawe. Ngai mutura muoyo arogoshwo.
Thai thathaiyai Ngai witu thai. Njitagwo Marilyn Wanjiru mucera wa bari ya Gathogo.
Niguo. Marilyn ni uronire mundu akinywa thakame?
Ni undu ucio umakete kandu manyua thakame ya andu.
Riu ri ni nyamu iriku iriaga irio ikomete na nda?
Nyoka.
Niguo. Riu ri andu mamenye atiriri otoria nda mathia iratuthenia guku iguru utuku na muthenya ukone githie iguru igithie thi ikorura igitaga thumu noguo haha na nie nguga atiriri ngumariria bururi uyu tuokire tukiro hindi ya sabasaba ati ni tukuona itureiro tugikorwo nake kuri mundu wari ruraya ruru rwa America aria mararehe guku ndawa ici na indo ici ciratugia na no wene ndege icio agikorwo na ku mweri mugima ngumariria okire bururi nduru wakoro wega ona hanini kana ni atia Marilyn
kanikio kwina kiagago kiu nigetha thakame andu iteke
nigetha thakame andu iteke na ore kuri andu marona atiriri ni magongona meko ini ni kuri uguo na riu nikio ndirauga atiriri andu mehuge muno na nie kuringana na uria ni ndironire nginya president uria araririe ri president ni akonidi andu meruteire gukorwo mahoya-ini na riu ni tukorwo mahoya-ini ma Ngai we mwene otherwise thakame yaku ikunyuo mbakuri-ini riku na nie ndi mumathai baba wakwa wa kimathai anjiririe atiriri ni kuri athuri ahoi Ngai muno riria githaka-ini angiona nda mathia ni python iria nene ri nawe ni muthuri to ndangiota kura na ndangiota kurwa nayo ri ati moyaga iria agekira kihuri-ini akamita ati iukaga inyorothaga igoka ikanywa iria riu o uronire ucio anyiteirwo ikanywa iria igacoka ikagaruka igathi ati amiraga oka tu arafu ati ukonywa iria utigane nani ati nyuaga iria riu igacoka igathi na handu hothe igacamania na muthuri ucio na githaka-ini tondu ni amumenya na muruki ndingimwika uru ati na aria matari ahoi matingika uguo no imuguthire riu ri nie ndironire tari na koda ni nyokeria nene
anakonda
na ugacoka ukone komete na
nda
na ndiri na moko hindi riu
ni tukwenda tuhoye
ni ona ngwenda kugatire ngumagia hau nie ndire ndare mbeca cia siasa na nie ndikaria tondu nie ndirona atiri ciko cirongoreirio na nikio andu maumaga ngoma na ringi ugakorwo ni wareire ugacoka ukaguthwo ni ngari ukaguthwo ni murimo tondu wendo rwa magongona macio na ni urire mbeca cia magongona macio
na muno makiria ruhi
ni ona nguga atiri president Uhuru ndakanetio ona gatui ndekia hetukio uguo ini niki tondu ithu tutirenda uhoro wa hapa sio juju
ni maombi
ni amaugiria uguo
ni beojete
aya sio nini
si uchawi ni maombi
sio juju
ni maombi
sio uchawi
ni maombi
na hendio president ne signature kiraga ke signature ya bururi reke ituthie naru ni mbara ya witekio
niguo
ni were iguru niguo ni more mahoya-ini Marilyn thiukiraga andu makoro mahoya-ini for good gutire njere
niguo
riu kireke tukeigue uria president araugire ari na kuria Naikuru Afra Stadium muthenya wa Madaraka akiaria miario iria iratuma we umenye ati no muhaka tukorwo turi mahoya-ini na tukorwo turi mahoya-ini seriously tondu bururi uyu uri handu aronania uri mbara-ini.
Nakuru mpo Nakuru mjambo. Asanteni sana kwa ukaribisho wenu mwema. Twawashukuru sana tukiwa hapa leo siku hii ya kihistoria, ikiwa ni siku ya kwanza kutoka tupate uhuru, tuwe na sherehe kama hii nje ya mji wetu mkuu wa Nairobi, na vile umejitokeza kwa wingi, yamaanisha ya kwamba Nakuru muko tayari, na vile tulikubaliana ya kwamba siku mbili zetu za kitaifa, kwa sababu tuko na 3, 2 tutakuwa tunasherehekea katika kaunti mbalimbali, na ndio tuweze kuunganisha wananchi wetu wa Jamhuri ya Kenya tuwe kitu kimoja, na ule wito wetu wa kusema ya kwamba hakuna mtu ambaye atabaki nyuma kwa maendeleo ya taifa letu. Kwa hivyo acha nisome kidogo hii alafu tubonge baadaye. Fellow Kenyans, we gather to commemorate that day 53 years ago when we finally took control of our government. The day we began to govern ourselves, the day we assumed the responsibility of managing our social, economic, and political affairs. Today, fellow Kenyans, I must say that I am proud to be a Kenyan for 3 specific reasons. First, after half a century of self-rule, we have shown our ability to renew and to reimagine our nationhood. I want to return back again to the subject of nationhood. To tell you the truth, a few Kenyans have chosen selective histories. Histories that have led to contempt for our rich past, contempt for our achievements, contempt for our identity. And yet, we remain a young nation. So I believe there is still time to break out of the bad habits of youth. We need to look back at the distance we have come, the progress we have made, and indeed be thankful for it. Of course, like any nation, we have made mistakes, but we are here today because we won our independence from the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, and because we gave ourselves a new constitution after years of debate, discussion, and delay. The history of this nation therefore fills me with hope. The mistakes we have made teach us to learn from our past, not to live in it, but rather to give hope and to work with strong conviction for a bright and prosperous future for 40 million Kenyans.
Wambere ni nyambe njokie ngatho muno kuri andu aito a kaunti ya Naikuru ni gutuhumbariri na kuonia ati nima no murugamirire bururi. Ngai witu aromurathima matuko mothe. No riri kiria nyuma na bata muno miario-ini ya president ni haria ugite atiriri, hindi iria twarwagira wiyathire ni twahurire thirikari ya thagathi ona yari na hinya muno, na riu ri ni arathire uguo arauga kaundu ta kuga atiriri thina uyu twina naguo-ri no tugutoria kuga atiriri aria maratuhura ihinda-ini riri onao ni tugutoria na maitho make matirare kuri andu mari guku bururi uyu, maitho make marare kuri athungu aria marathoga bururi uyu, na ni tuonete nginya maambasada mao makiingirira bururi uyu ona riu ihinda-ini riri turi hau niho ndirenda muno unyite. No riri uguo ni kuga ni tukiri na thu cirenja ya bururi iria cirathoga bururi uyu. Muthikiriria riu ni tugithie na mbere kumenya thu ito iria twerwo ni president wito nigetha uthie na mbere ukimenyaga atiriri turehariria niki na niki kiratuma tucoke maguru-ini ma Ngai o ta uria twaheirwo hinya ni Ngai tukigia na wiyathi uyu. Auga atiriri ni twahurire uthamaki wari munene ona kuri uyu uri kuo riu. No riri uyu uri kuo ri ni uthamaki wama niguo ndirenda umenye mokaga na maheni na magoka na maundu mangi. Ndiu ri reke tuthikiririe wira uyu uria uri YouTube-ini urauga atiriri, Ron Howard says the 1969 Apollo 11 moon landing was faked in a studio. Na wira uyu ri ni mo Black American urauga atiriri ni andu amwe aria mari studio iyo monire uria mu America ugire ati ni athie kwa mweri ni maheni undu uyu wothe wekikire studio-ini ya mbica. Riu mwanake umwe aragakorwo araria no riongi no the marutaga NASA akauga atiriri ariho na brother yake na ni monire mbica ici cikihurwo na kware studio-ini gutire mweri wathirwo, gutire kwa mweri gwathirwo. Koguo ri ndugatinde ukihahuka mundu witu, andu aya matire na hinya gutukira kiria mari nakio ni hinya wa mbara, no Ngai witu nake niwe munene wa ita iria iguru matu-ini riria reinainagia thi iri yothe. Koguo ri tuguthi kuri Ngai witu na tutigane na Ngai wa muthungu, Ngai wa maheni tutigane nake, tutige na mahoya ma maheni, tukorwo tunyitane ta nyumba imwe nigetha riri twaragie na kiugo kimwe ati Ngai witu ni Ngai wa ciama, Ngai wa magegania, Ngai uria waturehire guku thi na niwe ugaturuta guku thi na ti mundu uguka guturuta guku. Koguo ri tugakorwo na ihoya ria unduire na ti tukahoya ihoya ria unduire mucii na wathie kanitha ugathi ugakora ninge tiguo. Nie ndirenda nyumba yothe tunyitanire tuhinge mirango tucire athuri macire na mauge atiriri ona guku kanitha ici citu ri tuhoyage Ngai witu umwe, Ngai wa ciama, Ngai wa magegania. Tondu ona pastor ona reverend ona father ni arenda kirathimo no koro ringi mundu niendaga no agetigira washirika na ke washirika ni marenda na ringi magetigira father kana magetigira pastor. Araniriai muri nyumba ciana cia mutumia umwe nigetha na ithu tunyitane ni undu hinya witu ri umaga iguru matuine na noguo president araugire Ngai witu ri ni wonge tuhotanira na niguo guguthi.
Show called Arrested Development with Ron Howard being the narrator during this series. During this on-scene appearance, he talks about the Apollo 11 mission being faked. I find it very interesting what he says in the LEM. I'm going to play this footage now. Let's take a listen. I'll continue on.
Michael, hey, thanks for coming down. Finishing up casting this Sandy Griffith show thing. Okay. Wait, hang on a second. Are you guys finally making that movie? I've been reading about it for like 40 years. Well, it's not a done deal yet, but I want to talk about you. Yeah. Hey, let's go inside the LEM. You want to?
Wow, is this the one that landed on the moon?
On a soundstage.
Oh, right, from Apollo 13.
No, 1969. I'll tell you about it inside the LEM. It's soundproof in there. And it's a national secret. So, NASA did go to the moon in 71. That one was real. But in 69, they weren't ready. So, they faked the whole thing on the soundstage of Gentle Ben.
This is how they do it, mixing truth with lies. I believe when he says they faked it and they filmed it on the soundstage of Gentle Ben. For those that don't know, it was the same time frame prior to the moon landing. 67, series ended in 1969. And take a listen to what Ron Howard says here as well.
Yeah, me and my brother, we hit up in the rafters. We seen the whole thing.
And this is how they do it, mixing truth with lies. He's telling the truth as far as the Apollo 11 mission being filmed, saying how him and his brother saw it take place on the soundstage. Now, when it comes to the 1969 moon landing hoax, of course he's telling the truth there. It's nothing but a hoax, and I understand exactly what they're trying to accomplish here. I understand a good amount of people know the 1969 moon landing was a hoax. Footage looked fake. Everything about it was faked. They understand this, so make them convince them in another way that they actually got in the moon. So it doesn't matter if it was in 69 or 71. They just want you to believe that somehow, at some time, they actually landed on the moon when they never been to the moon and they never will go to the moon.
Astronauts to the moon.
Muthikiriria ni wakiigua akiuga atiriri gutire hende matiathire kwa mweri na gutire hende magathie kwa mweri na riri nake kamitha giuka agitwira haha atiriri muthuri kamitha na andu mamuthikiriria mothe kipindi-ini twanina habari cia thainya mamuthikiririe nigetha thie na mbere gutuhe ndumiriri eriga guka akauga atiriri andikite website ni akauga atiriri mundu muiru ni wogakorwo wa mbere guthie kwa njata kuoguo ri ithuĩ nĩ ithuĩ tũgathiĩ kwa mweri nĩ ithuĩ tũgathiĩ kwa njata nĩ ithuĩ tũgathiĩ kũu guothe nĩkĩ tondu ona araika arĩa makoragwo kũu igũrũ matu-inĩ ri makoragwo na rangi itũ kuoguo mũndũ ũrĩa ũrĩ gũkũ thĩ ũrĩ na rangi ũyũ twĩ naguo ri nĩ wokambata gũthiĩ kwa njata kwa mweri kwa Mars kũu guothe nĩ ithuĩ tũgathiĩ kuoguo thamaki nĩ witũ na hatiri undu ungi riu nike tugithikiririe wira uria naguo ndutete nguma internet ekauga atiriri 1969 we did not land on the moon na riri agagikorwo atiriri haha hari na mundu reto Bill Casing na astronaut andu aria mathiaga na rocket areto Brian O'Reilly othe marauga mugutia thirwo kwa mweri koguo waigwa ta mwana kio tahetitie na aria maugire ni mari studio ri aya nao ni andu ange na ni astronaut aria marutaga kwa NASA arauga matiathire kwa mweri kuoguo ri haha hatiri undu ungi ni wiohe mucithi tuthie Kirinyaga tuthie tukahumbũriri ni Ngai kuo tondu gutire njira ingi tondu mahitia maitu tu ni ate turahoya ihoya ria unduire ndagika imwe ndagika wengiri tugetukania Ngai ndahenagio rekei tuthie gacira kamwe hau tu no tuhititie na twareke bisha hau tukugia na riri tutetemeshe thi no raici mareciria mari iguru ni ithuĩ na Ngai witũ.
Tonight, we investigate the most extraordinary event of the 20th century.
That's one small step for man.
Man landing on the moon.
One.
But believe it or not, some people say it never happened.
This whole thing was a fake.
As we explore the evidence, analyze official government photos, examine the films, and hear the testimony of one former astronaut who's not afraid to speak his mind. Could the government have orchestrated the deception of the century?
NASA could have pulled off the greatest hoax of all time.
On July 16th, 1969, America held its breath.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Apollo 11 blasted into space, beginning its 250,000-mile journey to the moon. During their 8-day voyage, the Apollo 11 astronauts saw spectacular views of the Earth, floated in a weightless environment, and supposedly went where no man had gone before. But did it? Did they really land on the moon? Most of us think so. Millions of people watched on television as the lunar lander touched down, and these unforgettable words were spoken.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
But even today, there are those who claim that believing in man's one small step requires one giant leap of faith. Bill Casing was an analyst and engineer at Rocketdyne, the company that designed the Apollo rockets.
There were many problems evolved during the 60s that led people to believe that we're never going to make it to the moon.
3 decades ago, when the world watched Apollo's lunar landings, Bill Casing was watching too. But what he saw on television, combined with his experiences at Rocketdyne, made him a skeptic.
The whole thing then seemed phony to me. I think it was an intuitive feeling that what was being shown was not real.
As he studied the footage more closely, he was shocked to find several inconsistencies. Casing observed that despite the clarity of deep space, the stars were missing from the black lunar sky. He saw the American flag waving, even though there is no air on the moon. And he discovered that there was no blast crater beneath the lunar lander, where its powerful rocket engine had fired. This evidence convinced Casing that we never sent a man to the moon. But NASA dismisses these charges.
There are always going to be people who believe some outlandish theories, and the notion that we somehow were able to fake the lunar missions is pretty outlandish.
As outlandish as it might seem, it has been estimated that as many as 20% of Americans believe we never went to the moon. But how could anyone think that one of the greatest moments in human history is a hoax? Is it really possible that NASA deceived the world? According to a former astronaut, it's entirely possible.
Regarding the Apollo mission, I can't say 100% for sure whether these men walked on the moon.
Brian O'Leary was a NASA astronaut in the 1960s and served as a science advisor during the Apollo moon missions.
It's possible that NASA could have covered it up just in order to cut corners and to be the first to allegedly go to the moon.
Was getting to the moon first so important that our government would consider faking it? To find the answer, we have to go back 40 years, to a time when America and the Soviets were locked in a struggle for world domination.
People assumed that the nation that won the space race would win the Cold War. We defined that as being first to the moon. It was a time of more or less national hysteria.
On October 4th, 1957, the Soviets terrified America when they sent Sputnik, the world's first satellite, into orbit.
The New York Times had to publish an article explaining to Americans that it did not carry nuclear bombs that could be dropped on the city from that altitude.
The American public's fear of nuclear annihilation intensified as Russia took the lead in the space race.
House Speaker announced in Congress that we may be headed for extinction.
Many feared that the Soviet Union's ultimate goal was to put a missile base on the moon. Meanwhile, America's space program was having difficulty even getting off the ground.
Chances of getting to the moon and returning safely to Earth were something like 0.0017%. In other words, virtually an impossibility.
What actually happened in my mind is that during the 60s, they said, if you can't make it fake it.
But if the Apollo missions were fake, how was this monumental hoax accomplished? According to Casing, the launch of Apollo's Saturn V rocket was real. It just never sent astronauts to the moon.
The astronauts were launched with the Saturn V. Then, in order to account for their disappearance, they simply orbited the Earth for 8 days. And in the interim, they showed these fake pictures of the astronauts on the moon. But on the 8th day, the command capsule separated from the vehicle and descended to Earth, as of course was shown in film.
This theory inspired the 1978 movie Capricorn 1, in which the government attempts to fool the world by faking a mission to Mars.
We do not claim this planet in the name of America. We claim it in the name of all the people of the planet Earth.
Muthikiriria ni wake igwira wira ucio nacio ni andu makiuga wega kio matiathire kwa mweri riu reke tugituirie wega atiriri ni makweri andu aya ni mathire kwa mweri kana ni maheni tondu undu uyu ni wagirwo kumenya na kinyi na riu reke tuthikiririe wira wa atongoria a bururi wa America ihinda-ini riu ria President Nixon na wira uyu wandikitwo atiri YouTube Nixon administration admit fake lunar landing ati atongoria thirikari ya President Nixon wa America hindi iyo ni maugite wega fiu ati matiathire kwa mweri na ni ukuigwa na ni athuri akuru riu mararia na athuri aya ni Donald Rumsfeld uria wari munene wa thirikari kou Henry Kissinger niwe wari Secretary of State hindi iyo ni kuri na CIA boss ukuigwa kiaria kuri na NASA boss ukuigwa kiaria na ni ukuigwa mutumia akiaria uria wari Secretary wa White House na hindi iyo kare miaka 20 koguo andu aya ni uraigwa ni akuru muno makiaria koguo marauga mana meyumiritie kuga uguo koguo were tiga kuhingika maitho gutiathirwo kwa mweri ni woguthie kwa mweri amuka twende.
Have you never wondered why the President of the United States was not present at the launch of Apollo 11? Eve Kendall, Nixon's personal secretary at that time, made it clear that she would not object to stirring up some 30-year-old memories. It was Henry Kissinger who first took her on as an intern in the White House when she was still only 20. In Washington, Donald Rumsfeld, newly appointed Defense Secretary by President George Bush, celebrates his arrival in the Pentagon. With him are the ex-Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Lawrence Eagleburger, General Alexander Haig, and the head of the CIA, Richard Helms. 30 years previously, these five were President Nixon's main advisors.
Are we through?
All right. One more drink and then I'm ready.
There you go. I'm only teasing you.
You have a great chance to make a fool of me.
What is going on? What in the world? Hello, Mel. How are you?
I don't know. He looks a little slippery to me.
Now, how are we doing this? He's asking, you're asking the question. Well, but then you're going to have to translate them, so I know for sure what I'm being asked.
I understand French. I don't speak it very well, but I understand it.
Okay.
What's your problem?
No. Don't worry about it. It's okay.
Yeah, those are the kind of questions that you have on TV every night.
That's a long, complicated story.
Only a few people need to know.
I'll tell you a fascinating story.
The whole thing?
Are you running?
You're going to cut it all out of this thing anyway, but...
Let me tell you, off the record. Turn the camera off.
It's an incredible story. Newly elected, Nixon was up to his neck in the Vietnam War. He needed a big stunt to reverse his negative image with the American public.
President Nixon was on the telephone, speculating. He kept fiddling with the telephone cord. The Oval Office was in semi-darkness, and I found it very difficult to take notes of this meeting.
We had a meeting and talked, and he had made a number of decisions already, basically to try to calm things down.
The director of the CIA was looking panicked. He always overestimated the power of the Soviets. The Russians will put a man on the moon. It's only a matter of months, maybe even days. I have very accurate information about that. We can't wait another year. We have to launch Apollo 11 as soon as we can.
I was on the telephone constantly and at meetings and various other ways trying to promote more energy, more aggressiveness in this matter.
I said to the president then, I said, you can't let this succeed, and you must do everything necessary to make sure that it doesn't.
Now, the president turned to his experts at NASA and said, "Are we ready?" The director of the space agency only half reassured him. He said, "We might not be able to send back films of the first steps on the moon." Well, President Nixon refused that idea. No way. The whole world is waiting to see an American take the first steps on the moon.
He was very upset about it, and that he felt that something had gone wrong and maybe he was responsible.
The President of the United States was irate.
The sequence of events I remember as the most tense.
Then one of the presidential advisors, I don't know, General Alexander Haig or Donald Rumsfeld, said hesitantly, "What if we film the first steps on the moon in a studio? Then if we fail, we can always show those pictures to the public."
I talked to the president, and Kissinger supported it.
And at first I didn't take it very seriously, and I was told not to take it very seriously. Then it kept going on and on and on.
The president was prepared to do so, and I was prepared to support that.
And that was decided basically by Henry, Al Haig, and the Secretary of Defense.
But in the last analysis, the only person that could make the decision to do A, B, or C is the President of the United States under our system. And he would have to order it done.
Nixon settled back in his chair and closed his eyes for a few minutes. And then he stood up and said, "Gentlemen, you have less than 2 weeks to get everything prepared."
That was big. That was a big idea. It was an important thing, and a lot of effort went into it.
It was an anguishing decision for President Nixon to make. And I think he made the right decision.
He was the president, and he deserves the credit for having had the courage to do it.
He did that on his own. Sensible thing to do.
Then he came over to me and picked up all my notes, ripped them up into little pieces, and threw them in the wastebasket.
No stage in my life could I ever have anticipated that this would happen. At no stage, not even when I was made National Security Advisor. And I think it is a great symptom of the strength of America that this was even conceivable.
I thought it was the right thing to do because we have to do something to show that we're still the United States of America. We walked out of the end. President Nixon said, "I've decided to do that, and I need you to do this job. We're going to do it." It was just amazing. So we were trying to figure out who would do what when. He simply has got to have the person he wants in that job. And it has to be someone who's capable of doing it. And it has to be somebody he knows well. I said, "I'd like to talk to one person." And he said, "Who?"
Donald Rumsfeld was the first to propose Stanley Kubrick. The film would have to be perfect, but the set could never be built in time. The filming of 2001: A Space Odyssey was drawing to a close in a suburb of London. Why not use the sets there? Rumsfeld was sure that Kubrick would not refuse. During the Kennedy administration, the White House had granted him special authorization to access strategic areas of the Pentagon during the preparations for the film Dr. Strangelove. Kubrick owed them. "I told Mr. Nixon it's very dangerous to lie in the United States. You can't pull a con like that in a democracy. Too many people would talk. It would be absurd." But he said, almost sadly, "Go ahead anyway." Rumsfeld offered to go and negotiate personally with Stanley Kubrick. He and Henry Kissinger flew to England that same evening. Kubrick was surprised and amused by the idea, but began by refusing. Rumsfeld wouldn't give up. "We're only asking you to do one thing. Just leave us the keys to the studio for one weekend, just so we can shoot a bit of film and take a few shots. Everything will be tidied up again by Monday morning." In the end, Kubrick agreed. The fake footage would be shot in England in the MGM studios near Boreham Wood with a skeleton crew. The 2 technicians and 2 actors would be CIA agents. To guarantee their trustworthiness, all had to be single men without family ties. They would sign a contract committing themselves to perpetual silence about the whole affair. Once the filming was over, they would have to disappear. But Stanley Kubrick was a perfectionist. Faced with the CIA crew's lack of professionalism, he ended up, against his better judgment, supervising the shooting of the fake moonwalk. "But," he told them, From Monday morning, you're out of my life for good.
My goodness. That is somebody.
Ni wake igwera ati ona president mwenyewe ni auga matirathi kwa mweri. If we can't make it, let's fake it. Reure ndenda gukwira utore umenyete uguo ati mundu uria we utora gorumagirira ni mundu wa maheni na ni mundu wa njoragano tondu nikiona gukura igwa ni aketa kuragana na guku agoka kahenania agoka na indo shigoka shire kago cia ya VIP igacoka yathie guthimo kuria ni government chemist ni box kauniko tondu ndungigithie kuhingura tushuva tuothe twanjanjo tushuva tuothe ndungithie urutanetie ciro ukuruta kamwe wona wathima ni njegari ukiuge ni sawa no ririkana mundu uri orehete ni ucio aracirehe ciefure ariria aronire tando itu matarathesha ciana cindanori aroka aranengera muruwe na niwe Red Cross kwenda gukwira o muthikiriria riria ringi ugathi guthesho cindano ni mundu uhure mundu ucio mbisha na cokio menye ritwa riake na kibande giake tondu ucio ni wagiro gutwarwo igotini riria riothe warwara tondu ucio niwe evidence pio niwe wekirire mukua mwire waku na guthesha thumu muthikiriria ni ngwenda gugwathirira ugure vitamin D na niyo ikoragwo magutaine ma thamaki ni undu vitamin iyo magutaine macio ni gukuhonia homeno urona iremete kuhona na ningere ngwire riria wagura thamaki ri netige kurugwo haria magutaine maria uri erugagwo therukia uri otherukagia nigetha maguta macio ma thamaki makuhonie maguta ma thamaki ni magukuhonia na detoxification iria turaugire ogutha dania kitungu saumu na ndimo riu githikiririe ndagitari na ni maugite ati nginya kansa ni rahonio ni riua na riua ria Ngai retire ria rehe kansa na ni tugathoma haha na muthikiririe mandagitari ingi makiuga Jumaine yo ingi yokete wira arata kuothe na andu anyuothe mathikiririe nigetha ithuothe tuteithike turi nyombe emwe ndagitari uyu etagwo Dr. John Cannell na ni executive director of Vitamin D Council.
If you ask anybody who takes 5,000 units of vitamin D a day, they'll tell you they just don't get sick anymore. The colds and flu just don't happen. How that works is kind of neat. Your body makes hundreds of naturally occurring antibiotics called antimicrobial peptides. Just in the last couple of years, Professor John White at McGill University discovered, and others, that vitamin D really upregulates production of antimicrobial peptides. And people now, of course, it makes sense. Do you get many colds and flu in the summertime? No, not really. And people have always thought that the reason for that is people are crowding in the wintertime. But it turns out it's probably simply due to the fact that your vitamin D levels in the winter are sometimes 1/3 what they are in the summertime. You know, a lot of times when even scientists talk about science, they confuse facts and theories. For example, or people get more heart attacks in the winter because they're shoveling snow or because they're crowded or because of influenza. I mean, there's a lot of theories about it. The fact is they get more heart attacks in the winter. Of vitamin D in you. 5,000 units of vitamin D in you today has never been shown to be toxic. One of the ways you'll know that 5,000 units is not toxic is because if you put on your bathing suit and you go outside in the sunshine around noon and sunbathe for 20 minutes, you make between 10 and 20,000 units of vitamin D in your skin. So if you can make 20,000 units of vitamin D in your skin by sunbathing in 20 minutes, then it's very unlikely that 5,000 units of vitamin D taken in a supplement is going to be toxic.
Hey, madam, ne dama ka report yo to igua. No wa kumbe gutire gwathio kwa mweri ne kuhenio to henagio ni andu aya. Neguo. Na riu ni ati onge wa utungitikia ngikorwo nginya mau ne maheni. Nguma 1969 ne maheni matheria ndo matire mathie kwa mweri nginya no muthi. Na rere na mathie na ha Jomo Kenyatta athie aingiritie heho ati andu aya ne marenda kumunina. Na agathikire nyaga kuthie kuhoya niguo akirwo atiriri. Tiga kumaka muruguo no okanina. Koguo ri kiugo kiu nikio gitumaga nie na mwihoko ate uhuru no okanina no thina uri honi atiriri kweri gukire kendo kweri tungigitekia nguma kuri mundu uyu ti ndawa kwanza ici citikoragwo ndawa ino ikorwo ni murimo vaccine ni murimo ni virus kana bacteria kana kindu kiretwo microplasma na chemical thiine nicio riu ri ugacoka hatu andu marahaisha ndege makarehe witikio na guku ndirenda kuga atiriri kuri hihi
mundu ungi kama undu tamaya level eno ya iguru uguo igwa nginya ni president maupangire na makiutuka ne wa maheni kuri undu wa moko umana ko
mundu cio ndakikwira undu wa ma
uguo ri ungiuga atia Marilyn gutire kindu kia muthungu mundu agirwo kuyoha niguo nginya witekio yo riu andu mahone witekio yo twinaguo ri tutigane naguo tuthie witekio wa Ngai umwe Ngai ucio ri athathaiagwo atia athathaiagwo na ritwa riake we mwene na ndungi muthathaia na ritwa ria Ngai ungi itumuthathaiage atiriri ni undu
uthamaki ni waku ona hinya ona kugocwo tene na tene
thai thathaia Ngai witu thai uguo niguo Ngai ucio athathaiagwo na ndungi gweta ritwa ria Ngai ungi ni twetherie tucoke kwi Ngai witu na tuhoyage o tumugocage ari we wiki nake ri ni aguka tondu kini ithu twamuikirie nja ni gwitukania ni rere ni guthie kuri Ngai ithatu na Ngai ni umwe Ngai ni umwe Marilyn muthungu niwe wa Ngai nyingi ithwe Africa turi Ngai umwe na niki turi Ngai umwe niki tondu ithwe twi ciana cia Abraham tondu nikio turuaga tondu kurua ku niko tumenyaga ithwe turi ciana cia Abraham na ni mwihito wa Ngai umwe ate nie ngakorwo ndi Ngai wao na ugire ithwe ni ithwe tugukorwo Ngai ciao aca Ngai augire umekire harama tondu nie ngokorwo Ngai wao
na vaswatini irauga atiriri ati Ngai aroiga atiriri ni ndiri honokagia aria manyendete na amenyagirire aria moe ritwa riakwa ti maretwa makwa ritwa riakwa
ni ahoyo na ritwa riake Ngai mutura moyo Ngai mwene hinya Ngai murungu mwene hinya na ni wocio urathathaiyo ni athuri bururi mugima athuri othe handu nyomba ya Roma moike ihoya ria unduire o mundu na njira yake amuthathaie nigetha mahoya macio matukane na mathuri aria mekirinyaga tuhone bururi mugima riu ni undu wa maundu macio mothe twathoma gituthomere thaburi imwe iria gutucokia thayo ngoro-ini
tuguthoma thaburi 91 ni uhoro wa Ngai niwe mutugitiri thai thathaia Ngai witu thai uria wothe wikaraga ugitiri-ini wa uria uri iguru muno na akamenyagirirwo ni mwene hinya wothe no ahote kumwira atiri we niwe mugitiri na mumenyereri we niwe Ngai wakwa uria nie ndihokete tondu we ni ari kurigagiriria ndugatonye mutego-ini uria uhithitwo na ndukanyitwo ni murimu muru ari kuhumbagira na mathagu make na nduri ugwati urionaga tondu ni ari kumenyagirira wega wihokeku wake ni uri kumenyagirira na ukugitagire nduritigagira ugwati o wothe uria ungiuka utuku kana gutharikirwo uterigiriire mathaa ma muthenya kana muthiro uria uninanaga riria kwi nduma na mwanangiko uria uraganaga kwi o muthenya andu 1,000 ona mangigwa mwena waku wa umotho makuite na o 10,000 mwena waku wa urio we nduri uru uri gukoragirira weri no kwirorera uriroragira na maitho maku uri andu aria aganu maraherithio
niguo koguo ri ni Ngai uriku urauga ndeto ici
Ngai mutura muoyo
niguo Ngai uria umwe na ti Ngai uria muthungu arehire ni Ngai uria mumbi wa iguru na thi
tondu ni utuete Ngai mutura muoyo mukugitiri uria we iguru muno ukamutua mukumenyereri nduri uru urionaga na mucie waku nduri kuhagiririo ni haro ona iriku Ngai ni ariathaga araika ake makumenyagirire kuria guothe urithiaga mari gukuaga na moko mao niguo ndukahingwo kuguru ni ihiga ni urirangagiriria miruthi na giko na ukinyagiririe na maguru maku miruthi iria mithi na nyoka iria iri thumu
Marilyn cokera ringi tondu guku kwina ndamathia iria ciroraga andu na cikanyua thakame ciao
ni urirangagiriria miruthi na giko na ukinyagiririe na maguru maku miruthi iria mithi na nyoka iria iri thumu Ngai mutura muoyo aroiga atiri ni ndirihonokagia aria manyendete na menyagirire aria moiritwa riakwa majita ni ndirimetikaga ni ndirikoragwo hamwe nao magithinika ndimahonokagie na ndimateithagie ni ndirimaheaga uturo muraya na ndimahonokagie na riu tukirikia Ngai mutura muoyo twakuhoya uthie na mbere guturuirira ona uthie na mbere kumenyerera bururi witu thai thathaia Ngai witu thai Ngai mutura muoyo ni twakuhoya uthie na mbere na gutumenyerera Ngai mutura muoyo ni twahoya uthie na mbere na kugitira bururi witu thai thathaia Ngai witu thai baba ni twakuhoya utugitire kumanagia na mirimu iria tureheirwo ni thu citu ona mauru maria mothe matureheire ni undu uthamaki ni waku ona hinya ona kugocwo tene na tene thai thathaia Ngai witu thai thai thathaia Ngai witu thai thai thathaia Ngai witu thai Ngai we nyatawa kunewera Gikuyu thai thathaia Ngai